the president does believe that that Caitlyn Jenner has shown a tremendous courage as she has undergone this transition in a very public way.
Conservatives and Republicans are the new weirdos, the new kooks. And that is part of the political objective here in normalizing all of this really marginal behavior.
White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest relaying President Obama's thoughts on former Olympic champion Bruce Jenner's transformation. And conservative radio host Rush Limbaugh claiming the left is trying to, quote, redefine normalcy. And we're back now with the panel. Well, there's been a fascinating split this week, it seems to me, about Caitlyn Jenner. Democrats have been praising her as a hero, as a trailblazer, while Republicans have been very quiet about it. Former Education Secretary and conservative thinker William Bennett wrote this week. People feel like they're under siege and that the terms of the debate are now you either applaud it or you're a bigot. Brit, what do you make of this rush to embrace transgender people?
Well, it's part of this very heartfelt drive for acceptance in that whole community. And so this prominent person does this. It's described as trailblazing, but I'd have to say I think that trail had already been blazed many years ago when a tennis-playing doctor named Richard Raskin became Renee Richards and played in the pro tennis and was very widely seen and recognized at the time. So it seems to me that bridge has been crossed.
But you didn't have the president, through his spokesman, at the White House podium saying she's a hero.
That community is a part of the Democratic base, and it makes political sense for the president to acknowledge this Caitlyn Jenner and in an approving way. It's good politics, I suppose.
We asked you for questions for the panel, and we got this on Facebook from Alice Smith. She writes, I'd like to know why everyone in the media seems to think Jenner's story is so great and wonderful and worthy of intense coverage. Juan, I was fascinated to learn this week that the World Health Organization classifies transsexualism as mental illness. So how do you answer Alice and her talk about this rush to embrace?
I think Alice is onto something. Alice, you might want to get into the political analysis business because I think so much of this is a publicity stunt. As I recall, it was 100 million, is it 10 million? 10 million people Googled Bruce Caitlyn Jenner in the past week since the Vanity Fair cover. You stop and think about not only magazine subscriptions or purchases, but cable ratings. They got a new show, I Am Kate, coming out later this month, starring Jenner. I think the New York Post estimated Jenner will make $500 million from media appearances and the like. So, this is a big media event and media moment. I have compassion, empathy for anyone going through what I consider to be a very difficult transition. I'm not sure if it's mental health or whatever. I know that...
Do you think it's a big civil rights issue and movement?
Well, look, if you go into Russia or many of the Muslim countries, these people are not only imprisoned, they're beaten, they're tortured, there's no tolerance whatsoever. And of course, in the United States, we know about bullying that takes place, especially, I must say, for minority people who are going through these kinds of issues. So I have some understanding there. I don't know, civil rights, everybody should have their rights protected. Should it be forced on people? Should people be called bigots in the conservative community because they have trouble with it? At my age, I would be a hypocrite if I told you I don't have questions and I'm puzzled. And I think that's why you see so many people Googling Caitlyn Jenner.
George, we have seen in the last decade this astonishing change about gays to the point that the building just over my shoulder here, the Supreme Court, its 9 justices are now considering whether or not there is a constitutional right to same-sex marriage. Are we going to see the same thing with transsexualism? That in the course of 10 years, something that seems troubling to some people or confusing is going to be the accepted norm, and somehow there's something wrong with you if you don't accept it?
Well, that wouldn't have very little to do with even our litigious society. I'm not sure how, maybe under equal protection somewhere you can find some statutory or constitutional construction that makes a court case out of this. But meanwhile, usually that happens when someone's a victim, and it's hard to see how Jenner is a victim at this point. As Juan indicated, it's a lucrative business being a victim if that's what he is. And it's hard to see how we're not defining courage down in this case, because as Brit says, we've been down there before, and it's been done in public before. Some Republicans were accused this week of reticence about this subject. Now, reticence is a virtue very often, and I don't know why we have to be loquacious about absolutely everything. The president obviously has opinions on everything and a metabolic urge to tell the world about his opinions on everything. But other people are allowed, it seems to me, to remain a decorous silence about this.
Cheryl, I want to ask you about another interesting social, sexual story this week, and that was an FDA advisory panel recommended approval of a drug to help women with low sexual desire. Some women's groups had launched a campaign to push for this drug, the organization called Even the Score, noting that the FDA approved Viagra back in the 90s and saying that their approval now, or failure to approve, would be a statement about sexual equality when it comes to health issues. Your thoughts about this?
So I think this is very interesting. Now, issues of gender bias in women's health go back a long way. In the early 90s, President George H.W. Bush named the first and to date only female head of the NIH, Bernadine Healy, and she promptly insisted that women be included in clinical trials and founded a women's health initiative. And those issues of gender bias do persist. But I think what women's health groups would say is that that issue is actually separate and apart from this issue of this, quote, female Viagra. First of all, it's not really a female Viagra. Viagra is a pill that a man can take prior to having sexual relations to increase blood flow, not to get too specific.
No, erectile dysfunction.
Right. This pill is a pill that a woman would take on a daily basis to address imbalances in the brain. And so it's really not a female Viagra.
It's an aphrodisiac?
Well, it
actually was an antidepressant originally.
To address psychological symptoms.
Right.
But in any event, some women's health groups say that the FDA is basically being pressured into approving a pill that really isn't safe for women, that we don't know enough about, that the risk-benefit ratio isn't a good one. And in fact, the FDA has twice rejected this pill before. So there's a split among women's health groups. And I would note that the Even the Score group, which has been pressing the FDA to approve this, is financed by the drug company that's making the pill. So there's a real debate about this. And I think some would say, if there really were a female Viagra, it would be a great advance in women's health, but this pill maybe isn't it.
Very interesting. Thank you. Thanks, panel. See you next Sunday. I got nothing more. I got nothing.
You can't just go force this on women, you know.
I knew something stupid was going to get said here, and it just did.